The front door was pounded so hard that dust fell from the frame like rain, and in that moment, I, a man nearly 70 years old, knew this night would not end without either blood or handcuffs. My son kicked the door open, charging in like a rabid animal, just freed from its chain. The stench of whiskey and fury mixed so thick it hurt to breathe. After tonight, I understood that the boy I once held in my arms had become something capable of killing me right here in my own home. If you've ever stood inside your own house but felt like you were standing on a battlefield, if you've ever tried to keep peace for someone who was the storm tearing your life apart, if you've ever stayed silent because you thought silence was love, only to realize one day that silence can kill you too, then leave a single and tell me where you're listening from, so I don't feel like I have to walk through the dark alone. Thank you for giving this story a small place in your heart. My name is Franklin Isaiah Cole. I am nearly 70 years old. I live alone in an old wooden house sitting on a rise by the Cape Fear River on the outskirts of Wilmington, North Carolina. People say this house has stood since the late 18th century. To me, it's simply where I've lived more than half my life, where I know every whisper of wind and every creak of the floorboards when night falls. Tonight, the wind is strong. Not the usual wind, but the kind that makes the window panes tremble and the kitchen lights sway with each pulse. Inside the house, only the ticking of the pendulum clock on the wall remains, the one steady sound in an uneasy night. I sat at the kitchen table, a bank statement in front of me. I had read the last line 3 times and still couldn't believe it. First, it was $4,200 in your account, Dad. $40,200. For an old man living off retirement like me, that wasn't a loss. It was the rest of my life. It was medicine, roof repairs, and hurricane preparation. The savings were meant to keep me from being a burden. I'm no genius, but I'm not stupid either. In this house, only one person knew my account information. Darren. Darren is my son. He wasn't always like this. After getting fired from the transport company for showing up drunk and starting fights, he lost his job, lost his place to live, and had no one left to turn to. I opened the door and let him come home, hoping he could start over. At first he was polite, respectful, doing small chores in the yard, eating dinner with me like someone genuinely trying to fix himself. But everything changed so fast, I didn't recognize it happening. Alcohol showed up every night. Sometimes strange men's voices came through his bedroom wall, demanding money. He started slamming doors, throwing things, and cursing because the fridge was out of beer. Then came the kinds of comments that told me the change wasn't just his mood, it was the man himself. What's retirement money for? To rot? This rotten old house suits you. Old people go with junk. You live off retirement. I'm the one carrying everything. I tried talking to him many times. Right here in this kitchen, 2 cups of coffee are still steaming. I asked why he was tired, why he was angry, and why money kept disappearing. But he always had the same kind of answer. You live in some ancient world, Dad. Out there is real life. I'm carrying it all. Once I said, I'm old, but I'm not blind. He cut me off instantly. What do you know? You just cling to useless old junk. When I needed you, where were you? After that, those lines became habit, like he no longer saw me as his father, just an old shadow in his way. I opened the logbook beside the statement. I had been recording every change in him since the day he came home. Last night's entry read, he came home smelling of beer, slammed the fridge, yelled, then muttered curses. I marked the severity, higher than usual. 2 years. 2 years of watching my son go from a man struggling to get back on his feet to someone willing to do anything for money. And tonight, the bank statement in front of me confirmed what I didn't want to face. $40,200 were gone from my account, and without any investigation, I knew exactly who took it. I closed my eyes for a few seconds. Right then, from afar, the engine roared in a rhythm I knew too well. Tires crunched over the gravel. Headlights swept across the window, then vanished. I didn't need to look at the clock. Nearly 3 in the morning. The car door slammed. Staggering footsteps. The sound of him kicking the loose brick and cursing. He jammed the key into the lock, mumbling, "This ancient damn lock is just like its owner." The front door was being pounded as if someone wanted to rip the hinges off, each blow so violent that wood dust rained down from the frame. "Open up!" Darren roared, his voice thick with liquor and rage. I hadn't even touched the latch when he kicked the door hard enough to make it shudder. It cracked open, and he shoved his shoulder through like a provoked wild animal. The smell of whiskey, sweat, and the night streets slammed into my face. "Give me the money," he growled, tendons standing out on his neck, his eyes blood red, as if ready to punch anything in front of him. I hadn't spoken a word before. He suddenly slammed his fist into the wall beside me, the thud echoing through the house. Then he pointed straight at my face. "I told you, don't play dumb." He didn't wait for an answer. He circled the table, yanking open drawers, ripping the tablecloth down onto the floor. Not finding cash, he turned back, grabbed my collar, and jerked me forward. I lost my balance, clutching the edge of the table to keep from falling. "Darren, you're drunk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But his breath hit my face, like an animal about to bite. "I'm sober," he snarled, then rammed his shoulder into me so hard my chest hit the cabinet, pain tightening like a blade driven into my ribs. When I stayed standing, he grew even more furious. He snatched up a chair, swung it once, then threw it straight into the shelf. The crash was like thunder, and the Shigaraki pottery vase, the one Evelyn, my wife, bought in New Bern for $800, fell and shattered, exploding into glaze dust and razor-sharp shards across the floor. I shifted just in time to dodge a shard that sliced past my eye. "Useless," he sneered, then crushed the broken pieces under his heel, the crackling sound chilling. I stepped back once, but he stepped forward twice, closing the space until his chest nearly touched mine. He set one hand on my shoulder and shoved hard. I stumbled, my lower back slamming into the table edge with a dull crack, sharp pain shooting down my spine. Before I could steady myself, he shoved again, this time with both hands, my hip scraping the table corner as my legs buckled. I didn't fall because falling now felt like opening a door and letting him charge through it. He leaned down close, gripping my collar tight and hauling me upright. "I know you've got cash. Don't hide it." Without warning, he drove his knee into my stomach, a brutal blow that folded me in half. I braced on the table to keep from collapsing completely. "Darren, stop," I gasped between broken breaths. He didn't hear. His hand plunged into my coat pocket, yanking the wallet out so violently the fabric almost tore. He snapped the wallet open in 2 rough motions, flipping through each slot. When he saw the remaining cash, exactly $1,000 I'd set aside for medication, his eyes lit up like a man who'd just won a bet. "So the old man knows how to hide money, huh?" He smirked. He stuffed the cash into his pocket, quick and ruthless. Then he threw the wallet at the wall with a heavy thud. It popped open, and the photo of him at 8 years old fluttered down, turning over on the floor. He glanced, shrugged. "Throw it away. That picture's pathetic." I bent to pick it up, my knee burning. I stood in the wrecked kitchen, shattered pottery, an empty wallet, pain tearing through my back. In the corner of the workshop, the camera I'd installed 3 months earlier, the rotating kind, pointed straight into the kitchen, quietly recorded everything. While I was still struggling for breath, he headed up the stairs, weaving as he walked, gripping the railing like a drunk about to fall. On the 3rd step, he turned back, his eyes cold. "Don't call the cops." He tilted his head, smirking. "If you do, I swear you won't survive." He disappeared around the hallway corner, but his footsteps still hammered the floor, each one a lingering threat. I stood frozen in the ruined kitchen, one hand on my back, breathing hard. And for the first time in my life, I knew with certainty, if I endured one more night like this, I would die, for real. I stood in the wrecked kitchen for a long moment, my back still throbbing from Darren's shove. When I heard his bedroom door slam one last time, I slowly reached behind my shirt and touched the spot on my hip where I'd hit the table edge. The skin stung, slightly swollen, but no broken bone. At my age, surviving without collapsing was already luck. I opened the medicine cabinet, took cotton and bandages, and looked at myself in the fogged mirror. On my hip was a long purple bruise, its edges puffed like someone had struck me with a baton. I rinsed it gently, wiped the bruise, then wrapped it in a thin layer of bandage. Not painful enough to put me in bed, but painful enough to remind me that I had reached my final limit. I went into the workshop, turned on the laptop, and opened the file from the camera mounted in the workshop, the one I knew was still recording. I didn't turn on the overhead lights, only the small yellow desk lamp. I powered up the laptop and opened the camera file. The screen showed the scene I'd just lived minutes ago. Darren storming in, throwing the chair, ripping my wallet, shoving me, punching the wall, threatening me. Every sound, every movement recorded with chilling clarity. No longer a blurry memory. No longer felt like it. No longer the assumptions of an old man. This was the truth. Truth that could be brought into the light. I downloaded the video and saved it to the computer. Then I plugged in a USB drive and made a second copy. Then I opened my cloud account and uploaded a third. The old laptop ran slowly, its fan rattling, but I stood there patiently. Evidence mattered. A lifetime working with wood taught me this. To end a rotten structure, you need the right tool. And this video was the first hammer strike. When the uploads finished, I shut the laptop, closed it, then leaned back against the workbench, exhaling a long breath. Nearly 4 a.m, I knew I wouldn't sleep anymore. I went to the kitchen, picked up the broken pottery pieces from the walkway so I wouldn't step on them. Then I turned on the gas stove and set a pan over it. The heat from the pan began to warm the kitchen. I took eggs, a few slices of bacon, and the loaf of pre-cut bread. My hands trembled slightly, but steady enough to crack 2 eggs into the pan, stirring until the whites set. The bacon crisped at the edges, releasing a smell I hadn't cooked in years. That smell took me back to the image of my wife, Evelyn, sitting at the corner of the table each morning, stirring her coffee and smiling as she watched me make breakfast. I had no one left to cook for, but this morning I needed to cook. Not because I was hungry, because I wanted to remember who I was before deciding what comes next. When the simple breakfast was done, I set it on the table, not eating it. I picked up my phone and opened my contacts. 3 names appeared on the dark screen of the night. Sheriff Harold Pike, Marlene Jeffords, Mildred Cole. I dialed the first. The phone rang twice before Harold answered, his voice groggy. "Franklin, at this hour, did something happen?" I replied, slow and steady. "Harold, 8 a.m, come to my house. I need you to witness something." He started to ask more, but I cut him off. "Don't ask. Just come." I hung up before he could say anything else. I called Marlene, a retired judge who'd helped me with many property matters over the years. She picked up instantly, her voice more alert than the sheriff's. "Franklin, what's going on?" I said only one sentence. 8 a.m, I need you there." She tried to question me, but I gave her no chance. Lastly, I called my sister Mildred. She answered quickly, her voice already worried. "Frank, where does it hurt? What happened?" I closed my eyes, swallowing the tightness in my throat. 8 a.m, Midge. I need you to witness something." "Witness what?" she asked, voice trembling. "Is it about Darren?" I didn't answer. I said only, "Just come. I'm not calling for help. I'm calling to end this." I hung up. The house held only the sound of the wind and the pendulum clock. I sat at the table, staring at the plate of eggs, bacon, and bread. I picked up the fork but didn't eat. The breakfast wasn't meant to be eaten. It was a quiet goodbye to the peaceful life I once had. I knew 8 a.m. would change everything, and when the clock struck that hour, I would not turn back. Because I wasn't calling for help. I was calling to end these 2 years of hell. Dawn hadn't fully broken, but I could feel the fog wrapping around the house like a sheet of cold, thick enough that the yellow kitchen light reached only a few steps before the rest of the house dissolved into that murky gray outside. I didn't set anything out. I'm not the kind of man who lays tablecloths or arranges pastries the way Evelyn used to whenever we had company. On those mornings when she was still alive, the smell of waffles and her laughter used to fill this kitchen, but today, if anything covered the house, it was silence. I am a man, a woodworker, a father who has had enough. What I prepared this morning wasn't a welcome for guests, but a space for confrontation, to expose the truth I'd avoided for 2 years. A morning where every chair, every broken shard of pottery, every gust of wind scraping the porch would become part of a courtroom, with no official judge but full of judgment. I cleaned the kitchen, picked up every remaining shard of pottery, gathered them into a pile, then took a round plate and placed most of the broken pieces of the shigaraki vase on it. My hands are used to joining wood and setting joints, but with these shards I had no intention of fitting them back together. I wanted them to sit there, bare, like testimony, the warped glaze, the knife-sharp edges, material evidence of a family cracked apart. Each fracture a moment I stayed silent, each fragment a moment Darren exploded. I set 3 chairs across from the long table where they would sit, the 3 of them, Sheriff Harold, retired Judge Marlene, and my sister Mildred. 3 different angles, 3 people not easily swayed, 3 witnesses I needed so Darren could no longer twist the story, no longer warp it into Dad's exaggerating or just a normal argument. I stepped back, checking the distance between the 3 chairs and where I would stand. Everything had to be clear. No circling, no pleading, no pretending anything was still salvageable. This was a morning for truth, and I knew once it began there would be no retreat. After arranging the chairs, I walked around the house, checking the locks. After what happened last night, I wasn't leaving everything open the way I always had. The belief that your own house is safe was something Darren had erased with his own hands. I turned each lock, feeling the metal slide into place, small sounds that felt like building a thin final barrier between myself and the storm, named my son. When I reached Darren's bedroom door, I paused longer. The door sat closed, silent, but I knew behind it was a messy bed, the smell of old alcohol, anger not yet spent. I reached into my coat pocket, took out the room key I had never used. I turned it gently, locking it, not to trap him, to protect myself and the people about to walk into this house. A wounded young wolf cannot be left roaming free. I had raised him, patted his head, believed love alone was enough, but this morning I had to accept that sometimes the wounded creature bites the hand trying to save it. When every door was locked, I returned to the living room and looked out the window. Outside, the fog was so thick that the old tree just a few yards away was nothing but a pale shadow, its branches stretching out like ancient arms, reaching for something just beyond their grasp. From the direction of the Cape Fear River came the steady slap of water against the stone embankment, sounding like the old whispers of a land that had watched generations pass. Houses rise and fall, families form and break apart. The cold, damp wind carried the scent of moisture, beads of it gathering on the window glass like tiny silver droplets, sliding down like cold sweat on the forehead of someone about to admit what they've hidden. A morning like this suited what was coming, heavy, unclear, but unavoidable. Like that fog, you may hate it, but you cannot drive it away. I felt my heart beating slow and firm like a hammer tapping against old wood. Each strike a reminder. Today, either you stand or you lose this house, both in the literal sense and the other. I stood before the table, looking at the broken pottery, the half-cleaned kitchen, the 3 waiting chairs, and I saw clearly that I was no longer the old man cornered against the wall. I was the man opening the door for truth to enter, the homeowner inviting the final witnesses to see me cut loose, a rope that had been choking me far too long. I looked at the pendulum clock. The second hand was passing the number 12. The minute hand had just touched the number 11. I held my breath, waiting, and then a knock came at the door at exactly 8 o'clock. The second knock at exactly 8 o'clock sounded before I finally stepped out to open the door, my hands still dusty with wood shavings, my chest heavy as if someone had set an entire log on it. The fog on the porch was so thick that the figures waiting outside only appeared when they were less than a step away, like shapes walking out of a past I'd been avoiding. Sheriff Harold Pike stood first, coat damp with mist, hat pulled low, 2 young deputies behind him giving me that look. The look of people who've walked into too many homes with violence inside. Harold nodded once, the nod of a man who already knew this morning would be heavy, who didn't need me to explain a thing. I knew, and they knew, that a man like me calling them at 4 in the morning without giving a reason could only be because of one reason. Darren. No need to say the name. It had already been haunting this kitchen for a long time. A few seconds later came Marlene Jeffords, the retired judge, small in stature but with eyes sharp as shears, the kind that had stared down countless defendants without blinking. She carried her old leather briefcase, its strap worn thin, and as she stepped into the porch, she spoke quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. I brought something you should have seen a long time ago. Inside that briefcase was the disciplinary file Darren received when he worked at Cape Fear Logistics. Reporting to work intoxicated, creating safety risks, arguing with supervisors, nearly causing an accident. Short lines that held an entire chapter of his downward spiral. Back then, Marlene had been the presiding judge for the case, and by court procedure, she kept a copy. She once told me on an afternoon when we drank coffee on her porch, "If the day ever comes when you need that boy to face his own past, I'll bring this to you." A call from me at 4 in the morning was enough for her to understand that day had come, and no further questions were needed. My sister Mildred arrived right after, her face a mix of anger and ache, hands clenched tight as if holding herself together, her coat buttoned crooked in haste. She looked at me for a second, her eyes asking 1,000 questions though her mouth stayed closed, because she already knew who this morning was about. For the past 2 years, only Darren could push me to call family before dawn, and every time it happened, another crack appeared in this house. I opened the door for all of them to step inside. The kitchen, usually spacious, suddenly felt like a sealed room where truth had nowhere left to hide, where every broken shard, every scratch in the wood became displayed evidence. Harold scanned the scene, the shattered pottery, the chair thrown to the floor, the scraped table. He didn't ask, didn't need to ask. He'd seen these scenes in dozens of homes. Only today the victim happened to be an old man whose name he knew. Marlene set her briefcase on the table, opened it, revealing a worn yellow file. The name Darren Cole on the first page, bold and clear like the guilt he had always tried to dodge. "I brought it because I think this morning is the time," she said, her voice gentle but firm, like placing a new nail on rotted wood, knowing that after the hammer strikes, the old structure won't stand anymore. I hadn't spoken yet when the sound came from upstairs, Darren's bedroom door slamming open, heavy footsteps dragging across the landing. Then his voice, rough, hoarse with too little sleep and too much alcohol. "What the hell is all this noise?" He reached halfway down the stairs before he froze, as if someone had nailed his feet to the step. 3 adults were seated across from him in the kitchen. 2 deputies stood like cold pillars blocking his escape. His disciplinary file lay open on the table, uncovered, unhidden. My sister's behind me, her hands still locked together, and me standing straight for the first time, not avoiding his eyes, not searching for excuses on his behalf, ever again. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but long enough for Darren's face to shift through a torrent of expressions. Confusion, recognition, fear, then the attempt to drag anger back over his features, like a cracked mask, barely holding together. What is this? He asked, his voice breaking, the usual arrogance gone. No one answered. No one needed to. Because the moment he looked at his own file and saw the three faces waiting, this morning became the unmasking he could not escape. Darren stood frozen halfway down the stairs, as if someone had yanked the floor out from under him, but Sheriff Harold was the one who broke the silence, his voice low and solid like seasoned heartwood. Franklin, you said you needed us to witness. Now bring out the evidence. With no way back and no reason left to hide, I nodded, pulled a chair, set the laptop on the table, opened it, logged into the cloud, and played the footage from the workshop camera. The screen lit up, that cold white light shining directly onto the truth I had avoided for too long, and immediately last night appeared. Darren bursting in, kicking the door, punching the wall, ramming his shoulder into me, shoving me into the table, throwing the chair, ripping my wallet, grabbing the cash, and roaring threats at my life. Every violent motion, every shout, every crash echoed again inside the kitchen, now locked inside a flat frame but carrying the weight of a falling beam. The video kept going, capturing his ragged. Breathe in the clatter of falling things, the sharp scatter of pottery shards hitting the wood floor, all of it clear enough that it felt like the cruelty hadn't cooled at all. The deputy on the right stared at the screen, jaw tight, teeth set. He didn't need to ask anything because the camera spoke for him. The other deputy shifted slightly, adjusting the chest camera so his body cam recorded the entire playback. Standard procedure for indirect evidence collection in North Carolina, where words can be denied, but images rarely can. Harold spoke briefly without adding emotion. Keep it running. I pressed play, though part of me wanted to shut the whole thing down, because every frame was another knife turning in my chest. When the moment appeared, Darren driving his knee into my stomach, the kitchen fell so silent, even the pendulum clock seemed to recede into the walls. I saw Mildred's throat tighten. She swallowed something bitter she couldn't get down, her eyes red, but her body held still by force. Marlene tilted her head, not surprised, only confirming what she had suspected for a long time. What was happening today wasn't a sudden outburst, but the accumulated result of every time I chose silence. And Darren, his expression shifted in visible steps for all to see, from anger at being dragged out of bed, to irritation at being boxed in, to confusion as he realized the room's air wasn't on his side, and then a strangled kind of horror when he saw himself on the screen. Red-eyed, twisted-faced, his fist clutching his father's shirt, his foot grinding shards of pottery. I watched his shoulders twitch as he faced the sight of himself, poised to hit his father, face flushed with liquor, behavior out of control, stripped of any excuse of stress he'd ever used. "Turn it off," Darren whispered, almost pleading, but I didn't. He was no longer the one who decided what would be remembered or forgotten. "Turn it off," he snapped louder, but the sound cracked, hollow like an empty door rattling in the wind. When the video reached the part where he threw the chair and stood over the broken vase, Harold raised a hand. "That's enough, Franklin. The evidence is more than clear." He didn't say "seems like," he didn't say "maybe," he said "more than clear," the final period at the end of a sentence. Marlene set the file on the table, opened to a page marked with red notes. Under the domestic violence statutes of North Carolina, assault, threats, or the taking of valuable property from a parent is a criminal offense, no longer considered a family matter. This is grounds for an arrest file. Her voice wasn't raised, but each word landed like a hammer, driving nails into a coffin lid Darren had built himself. Darren glared, clinging to the last scraps of authority he thought he had. "Who the hell are you people to judge me? This is my house." He emphasized "my house," as if ownership could be claimed by volume alone. Mildred snapped, her voice both broken and sharp, like a blade worn down by patience finally honed. Again, your father's house, and you've been destroying it piece by piece. I saw you shove him in the backyard last month. I saw you smash his phone because he told you to slow down. Her hand trembled as she pointed directly at Darren. This isn't the first time. You just thought my brother wouldn't say anything. Mildred's words dragged every past outburst, every afternoon of yelling, every thrown object I tried to forget, and slammed them onto the table. Darren turned to me then, eyes desperate, hoping I would speak for him the way I always had, calling it, he's just in a mood, he's drunk, he's tired. But this time I no longer stood between him and consequence. I met his gaze steadily, without shaking, without pity. My whole life I had kept silent to give him chances to fix himself. But last night he stole the very last chance. I folded my arms across my chest, drew a breath, feeling my ribcage finally steady, and I said, each word clear and sharp like an old saw newly sharpened. I have nothing left to lose, Darren. I braced a hand on the oak table and slowly stood, my back flaring with pain from last night's bruise, but I kept myself upright. In the dead silent kitchen I could hear the crack of my own knees, yet for the first time in a long time I felt no shame in the weakness of age. I looked straight at Darren, the boy who once ran barefoot through the yard, now crouched on the staircase as someone cornered. My voice was low, heavy, but clear. These past 2 years, what have you done to this house, to me? Do you remember? He swallowed hard, eyes bloodshot, but said nothing. I didn't wait for an answer. First, it was $4,200 from my account. I set aside money to fix the roof before hurricane season. I don't use my card. I don't go anywhere. Only one person knew the password. I paused, letting the truth fall slowly. Then the things in the house. You kicked doors. You threw chairs. You smashed shelves. You destroyed the vase that your mother spent all day choosing in New Bern. Every time you lost your temper, this house lost something with you. Furniture can be fixed. Trust can't. Darren shut his eyes, jaw clenched until it went white. I continued. You threatened me. You got in my face. You shoved me. You said things no decent son would ever say to the man who once carried him in his arms. You said I was a burden, a leftover. You forgot the years I worked until my back bent just to keep you fed. Behind me, Mildred held her breath. The sheriff watched me, steady, as if urging me to finish. I drew in a long breath. You insulted me. You called me a useless old man. Dead weight. Right here in the house where every floorboard came from my hands. You said I lived off retirement money, while you were the one draining every dollar. I locked my eyes on him. Then I spoke the worst of it. And the worst thing, you pawned your mother's wedding necklace. Darren's eyes snapped open. He jerked like someone had struck him, his face draining to a sickly blue. I spoke slowly, without raising my voice. I didn't find out because the necklace was missing. I found out because I cleaned your room. The room you leave looks like a wreck. Under the desk there was a crumpled piece of paper. I picked it up, smoothed it out, and there it was, a pawn ticket. Darren's face twitched sharply, his lips trembling without sound. I went on, each word landing like a stone on cold ground. I took the ticket to the pawnshop on Market. The owner looked at it and said, If you have the ticket, you can redeem it. Pay and take it back. No proof of ownership needed. I saw Darren's hands claw tight against his knees. I handed him the ticket. I paid. And they brought out your mother's wedding necklace. The kitchen felt vacuumed of air. You knew she kept it her whole life. You knew it was the last keepsake left of her. And still you pawned it for a few nights of drinking. Darren whispered, his voice like a thread about to snap. Dad, I was going to get it back. I shook my head. Don't say you were going to. If you were, that ticket wouldn't have been crumpled under your desk like trash. At those words, Darren collapsed completely. He sank onto the stairs, hands over his head. shoulders shaking, a sob bursting out, not the shout of a drunk, but the cry of someone who realizes he's crossed a line he can't return from. Dad, I'm sorry. I messed up. Don't hand me over to them. I swear I'll change. I'll work. He reached toward me as if grabbing for the last bit of hope. All my life, whenever my son cried, my instinct was always to pull him close and say, "It's okay." But this morning, if I did that, I would be signing my own death warrant. I looked at him, longer than I ever had. I remembered every time I shielded him from consequences, covered for him, protected him, even when he was wrong. Then I let out a breath, not because I was tired, but because I knew it was time to cut the rope choking us both. I said the hardest words of my life. I protected you, your entire life, and now I'm going to protect myself. Sheriff Harold rose slowly, adjusting his belt, as if marking the line between the old life of this house and the new one. Then he looked straight at Darren, his voice dropping low and firm like a hammer striking ironwood. Darren Cole, you are under arrest under the domestic violence statutes of the state of North Carolina. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used as evidence in court. The words under arrest cut through the kitchen like a saw slicing through dry. Timber, sharp, direct, irreversible. Darren jerked back half a step, his spine hitting the stair railing, his eyes wide with the raw fear of someone who thinks shouting might save him, but realizes no one is listening anymore. He looked around the room, searching for an exit, but every door in the house had been locked before sunrise. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to have no way out. "No, no, you can't," he sputtered, his voice slipping away from its usual swagger. But Harold simply raised a hand, unshaken. The two deputies stepped forward with steady, heavy strides, their boots thudding against the floor like each was counting down the last seconds Darren had in this home. When Harold opened the front door to take Darren outside, a blast of cold air rushed in, carrying fog sharp as needles, and the eyes of the neighborhood fell immediately onto my yard. In Wilmington, a single patrol car parked in front of a house is enough to make an entire street hold its breath. I looked across the yard and saw silhouettes. Neighbors holding coffee cups, arms crossed, or standing by the fence as if watching a show. They didn't speak loudly, but none of them turned away, and when Darren was shoved onto the porch, his face blotched red with fear and rage, a woman near the gate leaned toward the person beside her, speaking just loud enough for all to hear. I knew this day would come. There was nothing cruel in it, something worse. It was the truth everyone saw except me, the one living inside the house. Darren heard it, and his face drained. Then he looked at me as if clutching at the last scrap of dignity. But a deputy already had his wrist, pulling his arm back. The click of the cuffs rang out, sharp, cold, exact, sealing the end of the 2 years of hell I had endured. That small sound echoed like a blow to Darren's chest. He screamed, his voice cracking like an animal cornered. "You'll die alone in this house." The words burst out poisonous, both curse and plea, no different from the venom he spat on drunken nights. I stepped forward, standing in the doorway so he could see my face clearly. Not trembling, not bowing, not backing away. I answered slowly, each word heavy as a century-old timber hitting the floor. "Better than dying by your hands." The entire yard fell silent. Neighbors lowered their heads, a few stepped back, as if witnessing a family line being severed. Darren was pushed into the patrol car. The door slammed, and metal echoed through the fog. The engine turned over. The car rolled forward, gravel crunching beneath the tires, with a long, sharp sound like a blade drawn across stone. As the car disappeared down the street, the siren's faint wail was swallowed by the gray morning. I stood there for a moment, hand on the doorframe, not realizing how tightly I was gripping it. When the last sound of the cruiser faded, something inside the house seemed to collapse, inward. I walked back into the kitchen, my knees softening, my heart pounding against my ribs, as if my body finally allowed itself to breathe. I sank into a chair, not crying, not calling out, just letting myself fall, like an old tree that had survived the storm, but lost a piece of itself to buy whatever piece remained. 3 weeks have passed since the morning Darren was handcuffed and taken away, and the house by the Cape Fear River, once shaken by pounding doors, shouting, and things breaking, has become so quiet that sometimes I turn on the radio just to remind myself I'm still alive. I live alone, completely alone, and the long stretch of silence feels like it pulls my mind taut, not from fear, but from emptiness. At first I thought that once he was gone, I would feel relieved, but my body, as old wood cracked over the years, still holds invisible shock lines. Officer Pike at the sheriff's office advised me to see the city's therapist, and I listened. Each week, I sit in a beige-walled room and talk about the shouting, the sleepless nights, about how every time I hear a car pass by, I flinch, as though waiting for someone to kick the door in. The doctor said it was the reflex of a long-term domestic violence victim. Hearing the word victim made me feel embarrassed at first, but I had to admit she was right. To keep the past from repeating itself, I upgraded the entire camera system around the house, a system that once consisted of only a single hidden camera on a beam in the workshop. Now I have front and back motion sensor security cameras, wires tucked along the frame of the house, tiny LED lights glowing like cat eyes in the dark. Not because I fear Darren will return immediately, but because after 2 years of instability, I want to see every corner of my home when someone enters it. The house has begun to feel peaceful again. In the mornings, I hear the river lapping outside. At noon, sunlight angles through the windows. And at night, I pull a chair to the porch to listen to crickets in the grass. Everything feels like the life I used to have before it derailed. But each time I walk past Darren's room, a hollowness coils in the air. A nameless sadness, unclear whether it is regret, disappointment, or just the quiet left behind after a storm pulls away. I want to believe I'll get used to it, but the house is too big for one old man, and sometimes the silence feels like a cold blanket laid across the mind. On Monday morning of the 3rd week, while I was checking the back door lock, I heard a car pull slowly into the yard. I stepped onto the porch and saw the mail truck stopping, the mailman waving before holding out a pale yellow envelope stamped with New Hanover County Jail. I stared at the stamp longer than I needed to, then finally reached out and took it. The mailman didn't ask anything, only nodded and drove away. I stood there on the porch, morning dew clinging to the railing, the river breeze tugging at my coat. On the envelope was Darren's handwriting, crooked, rushed, leaning slightly, the kind of handwriting that never finished a sentence without scratching out 3 words. I held that envelope, heavier than a wooden box. I brought it into the kitchen, set it on the table, and sat staring at it. An hour passed, and I still hadn't opened it. I reached out and touched the paper, then pulled my hand back, then touched it again, as if the envelope held a piece of my life I wasn't ready to face. At last, I sighed, nudged the envelope away a little, and whispered into the empty room, "Not yet." And I left that letter lying there, like a new storm forming somewhere offshore but not yet touching land. I left the envelope on the table all day. When night fell and the house held nothing but the sound of the river and the pendulum clock, I finally reached for it again. I opened it with the old letter knife, the one Evelyn used to open Christmas invitations from the church. Back then, she opened mail with a gentle smile. Today, I use the same blade to open something that might bring down whatever was left standing in me. The letter was thin, but when I pulled it from the envelope, it felt as heavy as the years of wreckage behind us. Darren's handwriting leaned and wavered, as if his hand shook while he wrote, as if every word hurt. "Dad, I know I deserve to be here. I know I did things that can't be forgiven." The first line sounded familiar, too familiar, like the apologies he used to mumble after every drunken rampage. I kept reading, expecting nothing new, until my eyes caught a darker line, the strokes heavier, as if he had taken a deep breath before writing it. There's something I never told you the truth about, not because I want forgiveness, only because if I don't say it now, I'll never say it. I tilted the paper slightly, as if the truth needed the right angle to be seen. Darren wrote, "These weeks in here, I sobered up completely, Dad. The first time I've been truly sober in years. No music, no beer, no one to blame. Just four walls and my real face staring back at me. I felt my heart tighten. I remembered every time I screamed at you, every door I slammed, every chair I threw, every night you stood there looking at me, not saying anything, and I still tried to say things to hurt you more. I remember all of it, Dad. I remember so clearly I can't sleep." The paper trembled in my hands, but I kept going. I used to think I was strong because I yelled louder, or because I was younger. But in here, I learned how much of a coward I really am. Only a coward dumps everything rotten inside him onto the one person who never left. The next line was written slowly, each stroke carved into the paper. "You owe me nothing. I'm the one who owes you my whole life." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. I'm sorry to Mom. Sorry to you. Sorry for everything I broke in that house. Though what I broke most wasn't the furniture, but your trust. A drop fell onto the page. I don't know if it was mine or one Darren left while writing. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm only asking you to come to the hearing. I need to see you once, while I'm sober, not drunk or shouting. I want you to see me as someone trying to fix himself, not the wreck you last saw." I folded the letter, unfolded it, folded it again, as if the crease could break the truth tightening around my chest. The Cape Fear wind drifted through the window, cold moisture brushing the back of my neck. I looked around the house, every board, every crack, everything waiting for my answer. I stood up, still holding the edge of the letter, the paper wrinkled from how hard I had gripped it. I looked out to the yard where Darren had been taken away 3 weeks before. Then I said quietly, but firm as a nail driven into wood, "I'll come to the hearing. Not because Darren deserves it, but because if I don't, this story will never end." 6 months after the hearing, I sat in the family therapy room of the correctional facility. A pale blue-walled room, a simple wooden table, a small barred window where light slipped in as thin as sawdust shavings. I didn't know what I expected, a remorseful boy or a man trying to hide the old parts of himself. Then the door opened and Darren walked in. No more heavy, careless gait, no more swagger soaked in liquor. He lowered his head when he saw me, shoulders pulled inward, his breathing slow and deliberate. 6 months inside had made him thinner, but had softened his eyes, not with weakness, but with shame. He sat in the chair across from me, his hands woven together, thumb rubbing his index finger like a child trying to steady himself. "Dad," he said quietly, "thank you for coming." I simply nodded, not rushing to speak. I wanted him to start. Darren lowered his face. "I've been thinking. A lot. In here, they make you face yourself. And I realized something I've avoided my whole life." I tilted my head slightly. "I was jealous," he blurted quickly, as if saying it slowly would make him take it back. "Jealous since I was a kid." I narrowed my eyes. He continued, "I was jealous of the things you made, the woodwork everyone praised. Jealous that you spent hours in the workshop, focused as if the whole world lived inside the grain. I thought you loved your craft more than you loved me." The sentence struck me harder than any shove he'd ever given. I felt like a board being flipped to show its underside. Dust, mildew, old cracks exposed. I drew a slow breath and said, "If you believe that, then I failed to show you the truth. I'm sorry for that." Darren looked up, startled. Maybe because he didn't expect me to apologize, but I didn't stop. "Darren, my craft, It kept me standing after your mother died. But I never put it above you. I just didn't know how to show it. I met his eyes, steadying my voice. But even so, what you did cannot be overlooked. Darren nodded, eyes reddening as if bracing for whatever sentence came next. I continued. If you want to rebuild, we'll try. But you will not live in the house. Not now. I saw his chest tighten, but he still nodded. We meet only in public places, a cafe, a therapy room, anywhere we both feel safe. I spoke slowly, each word clear. And you will not touch any of my property, from a hammer to a board. No keys, no accounts, no private room. Darren swallowed hard, then whispered, I understand, and I agree. I just want to start again, even from a distance. A tear fell onto the table. Not a sob, just a single drop. But it felt like the first rain hitting dry wood. He raised a hand to wipe his face, but his fingers trembled. Trembled as mine did years ago when I first held him. I stood and walked around the table. Darren lifted his head, afraid I'd turn away, but I placed my hand on his shoulder, the shoulder I once carried, once steadied as he learned to walk, once touched to comfort him, and then avoided for years out of fear of the distance between us. His shoulder shook once. For the first time in years, I gave a slight squeeze. Just a squeeze. Not full forgiveness, not full reconciliation, but a small nail driven into the start of something new. And Darren cried like a 6-year-old lost in a market. I stood there, my hand still on his shoulder, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to call him by the name I once whispered when I held him close. Son! I left the correctional facility that day feeling strange, lighter, as if I had set down a heavy stone, but with a dull ache in my chest from a wound that never fully healed. Darren stood behind the glass, his eyes red but no longer clouded, like the days he screamed in my face. And when I called him son, I didn't know if it was forgiveness or just a way to keep us from losing each other again. We didn't hug, didn't make promises, didn't stage a movie reunion, just two people finally stopping, no longer running in opposite directions. That small, quiet moment, as small as a nail set into the edge of a board, became the thing that kept the whole door from collapsing once more. And then time moved on. 1 year after the day I stood in the correctional facility and placed my hand on Darren's shoulder, both his life and mine had settled into a new rhythm, quiet, imperfect, but with a path forward. Darren now works in the warehouse of a transport company near the Wilmington port. The work is heavy. The pay is not high, but he accepts it, even feels grateful for a chance to start over. He lives in a small rented room on the second floor of an old building, saving every dollar, cooking his own meals, doing his own laundry. No more alcohol, no more shadows from the past, clinging to him. Each time I see him walking toward the cafe by the port, where we meet every 2 weeks, his posture has changed, slower, less volatile, his eyes no longer darting around in search of an explosion point. As for me, I live quietly in the house by the Cape Fear River, repairing each rotten board, replacing the porch roof, and repainting the windows. Every morning I water Evelyn's wild daisy garden, the flowers she loved most, the ones she planted from seeds she brought back from Ashborough more than 30 years ago. They bloom again after years without a hand to tend them, and each small white blossom feels like her breath drifting around the porch. At noon I work in the wood shop. At night I light the oil lamp Evelyn once bought at an old town market. The house is peaceful now, peaceful enough that even the sound of a hammer from the neighbor's workshop feels pleasant. But this peace isn't the return of the past. It's a new state, one where I accept that some things once broken will never mend the same way again. Every 2 weeks I go to the cafe by the port. Darren arrives early, always sitting at the table near the window, hands clasped, back slightly curved, his eyes no longer confrontational, but waiting. We talk just enough. He tells me about loading freight. I tell him about fixing the roof. And sometimes we sit in silence watching cargo ships drift by. Once he asked, "Dad, do you think we'll ever be normal again?" And I answered, "Not like before, but maybe better in a different way." He nodded like someone who has learned not to demand anymore. This past year, I also did something I never imagined I would. I rewrote my will, not to punish Darren, not to strip him of anything he might think he deserves, but because I know better than anyone that this house, once a refuge, had also become a battlefield. I don't want to leave that battlefield to anyone. So I wrote, the entire house and the riverfront land on the Cape Fear would be given to the Wilmington Senior Safety Fund, a fund that supports and protects the elderly in the town, those who may be living with the same fears I once did. When I signed my name, I let out a long breath, like setting down a stone I hadn't realized I'd carried for years. I didn't tell Darren, not a secret, just not the time. On a late autumn afternoon, after our cafe meeting, Darren stood up before I did, hesitating for a second, as if waiting for me to do something. I looked at him, the man who once made me shake inside my own home, now trembling because he didn't know whether he should hug his father or not. I placed my hand on his shoulder, the second time in years. His shoulder trembled. He tried to speak, but nothing came out, his eyes going red as fast as dry wood catching flame. I squeezed his shoulder, not strong, but firm enough to let him know that an ending isn't the same as cutting someone off. Then I said the thing I had thought about for a year, the last thing a father, truly a father, can say to a son who nearly cost him everything. Being a father isn't always about holding your child close. Sometimes you have to push them away to save you both. If this story has touched you even a little, I hope you take a moment to look at yourself and at the people you love. Every family has shadows outsiders can't see, silences no one speaks aloud, wounds not big enough to call tragedy, but never small enough to truly disappear. If you are living through heavy days, remind yourself that you deserve to be heard. And if someone in front of you is angry, hurt, or closed off, know that they might be waiting for a hand offered at the right time. If you've stayed with me to the end, I would be grateful if you subscribe to the channel. Thank you for staying until the last line. Thank you for feeling this story.